Welcome back. Hit Netflix documentary The Tinder Swindler has captured the attention of hundreds or millions rather of people around the world. And if you're one of the few that hasn't watched it, it revolves around women being conned by Simon Leviev. He scammed them out of hundreds of thousands of dollars by pretending to be a friend and even having romantic relationships with them. Many have been critical, saying the woman should have known better or even calling them gold diggers. But many others are now coming forward to talk about similar experiences. Head of healthcare leadership at Stellenbosch University's business school, Renata Schoeman, says this type of psychopathic behavior is not only reserved for romance. She warns that psychopaths stalk office corridors too. So let's discuss this matter with her now. Renata, thank you so much for your time this morning. I mean, certainly it has brought in something that has been in existence, but perhaps not spoken about intentionally when it comes to just how much psychopaths are able to lure the most vulnerable, whether it's out of money or whether it's out of emotional support, whether it's formulating some kind of dependency with them. But how prevalent really is this kind of behavior amongst those who live amongst us?
So it's interesting, if we look at the prevalence rate, it's luckily low. It's less than 3%. But when we go into CEOs and top structures of companies, the prevalence is much higher. Not to say that everyone that's successful is now a psychopath, because luckily people use their charisma and their charm and the way of manipulating relationships also in a constructive way. When we talk about psychopathic behavior or the psychopath in the corridor, or then in romance relationships, as in the case of the documentary, it's more when it's manipulative for a negative gain or for personal gain. And there's absolutely no consideration for anyone else's feelings, emotions, property. There's no sense of remorse. So it's clear exploitation, it's very manipulative, and it's strategically deceitful.
Okay, so then if you're saying it's pure manipulation, strategically deceitful, we need to go back to what kind of a person actually does that. Does that person lack complete empathy? Is that person a complete narcissist? Is it a psychological impediment? Is it just somebody who chooses this kind of behavior?
So we need to be clear in terms of when we use the word psychopathy. It means that there's a psychiatric disorder or a personality disorder, which we call antisocial personality disorder, which, according to our diagnostic criteria that we have, there's very strict, clear criteria when we do diagnose it, which would include a complete lack of empathy, disregard for other people. They can get this rage episodes if you cross them. That often, but not always, cross the social boundaries, they can be deceitful, etc. But even if you have an antisocial personality disorder, it's only when your behavior then also cross socially acceptable norms and guidelines, and when the behavior becomes criminal, when we would go into other wording, for example, psychopaths or sociopaths. So the idea is then that you really cross certain acceptable lines, and that it can also cause functional impairment. Now, the irony, contrary to other psychiatric disorders where the functional impairment can be for yourself and the emotional distress is for yourself, when you have a personality disorder such as antisocial personality disorder, although there can be emotional distress for yourself, it's mostly your victims that suffer, or the people that you work with that suffer.
Let's talk a little bit about the victim then. Obviously, when it comes to this kind of disorders you're speaking about, and that's how it's strategically deceitful, that means the strategy is being able to choose who the victim is going to be. What kind of a victim actually falls prey to these kinds of people, whether it's in the corridors of the workplace and the person is trying to deliberately manipulate and swindle you, or whether it's the CEO who's deliberately trying to use psychopathic mechanisms of, creating an unfruitful or inconducive environment. What kind of a person falls prey to these kinds of people?
Right, the first thing I would warn against is against gender stereotyping, because I think many people react about the woman that's gullible, etc., etc. Men also fall prey to this behavior. It's also not only love-hungry or insecure victims, it sometimes can be other highly intelligent, highly successful people. The problem is all of us have a brain that's wired for social connection. We are wired to cooperate. We are wired to trust people. Otherwise, no progress in civilization would ever have been possible. You are more likely or prone to fall a victim if you are emotionally isolated. So if you do not have strong friendships that you can bounce with, say someone asks you on a date, you do not have someone to discuss this with. Is this a good idea? What do you think about the person? Do you know the person, etc.? And at work, also, because part of the psychopathic behavior is that they manipulate communication lines and they also can spread false information and misinformation. If you do not have good relationships at work with other colleagues or with a mentor that you can also discuss this with, it might make you more vulnerable.
And very quickly, does that mean that this kind of individual tries to isolate you as a person, friends, isolate you from family, isolate you from even having great relationships in the workplace?
Yes, absolutely. That's part of the modus operandi, because if you start to doubt your own gut and if you start to doubt your own thoughts and you cannot bounce with anyone else to keep a sense of reality and have context for the behavior, obviously you can then more play into the script that they are scripting.
We'll leave it there. Psychiatrist Professor Renata Schoeman just giving us the latest details there and perhaps on how not to be swindled.